So here we are for the night, the last topic of the night. Actually, the other themes that we chose, Pastor Trudy and I, we were going kind of based on what we were finding in the scriptures, but this one is more of a liturgical tilt because we are about to enter Lent. So fasting for Lent is our topic for the night. And I don't know how each topic that I'm teaching ends up with the subcategory of who has time for it. I think we've discovered I'm not out to answer that question. Like, it's up to you if you have time for it. But why does it matter is something that we'll be able to kind of figure out for ourselves over the course of our time. So where we're going, first off, we're going to redeem spiritual discipline, because I know that discipline came up weeks ago when we were talking about discipleship, I think. And there was some kind of hesitation about it. So we're going to redeem that. We'll define fasting, what it is, what it isn't. We'll talk about biblical occasions for fasting, holy days for communal fasting, such as Lent, and considering Lenten fasting. Mm-hmm. So first off, what comes to mind when thinking of spiritual discipline? So you can sort of rehash those hesitations that we voiced a few weeks back, or just say, for this moment, what is it that comes to mind when you think of spiritual discipline?
A spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. Something you do kind of over and over again in a disciplined kind of way. I think discipline, I don't know if I was here for that last discussion, but my little rebellious nature doesn't necessarily like it, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
For me, it's habits.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, Carol. Maybe spiritual habits.
Spiritual habits to me are, oh, do I set a special time to do them? Is there a special action that might take place that would prompt me? I may hear because I'm across from a fire department, I may hear sirens. That prompts me to say a prayer. I may be stopped at a stoplight. That prompts me to pray for the people around me. Things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was me. I was thinking about just like there are certain things that I do that are kind of a repetitive thing that I really find prayer is a good companion, like folding laundry, where it could be tedious, and putting the socks together, which isn't necessarily my favorite, but praying while you're doing it kind of helps that. And I find when I'm doing like the chopping of vegetables and fruit and that, there's something about that, like the transformation of the whole things coming into something else and then being cooked, that I also accompany with prayer.
Yeah, some of the daily things you do.
Mm-hmm.
And
I also, and definitely, when the ambulances go by or any of that,
Mm-hmm.
Also tagging off of Carol's, prompts as well.
I like praying when I vacuum because everything else is shut out, and
Well, it sounds like we already did some redeeming of discipline. You don't need my hand holding in that. Usually what the difficulty is with like spiritual discipline, like spiritual disciplines usually involve activities of the mind, of the body together. And so there's sort of, I don't know, there's a negative connotation to discipline, but you named it. Like discipline can mean something as everyday as a habit, a pattern. So when we think of spiritual discipline, I liked the definition that was raised up by Marjorie Thompson. She has a book called Soul Feast, which kind of walks through different spiritual disciplines or practices. But she just says that discipline is a training regimen freely taken on for long-term personal benefit. So much like an artist practices their trade by painting, it's it's meant to sort of help you to grow or to change. And I quote at the bottom, I don't quote her, but I quote back to the celebration of discipline. We mentioned this book a few weeks back too by Richard Foster. And he explains it in a way that I thought was really beautiful. Would someone like to read that quote from him?
What a neat quote. I would happy to.
Thanks.
Spiritual disciplines are a way of sowing the spirit. The disciplines are God's way of getting us into the ground. They put us where God can work within us and transform us. By themselves, the spiritual disciplines can do nothing. They can only get us to the place where something can be done. What a beautiful thing.
And what speaks to you in that
Oh,
understanding?
it just puts me right, for me, puts me right where I start my no words communication, truly. I
That
like the
really-
feeling of being empty of other things.
Right. And it really emphasizes that the purpose of discipline is growth, right? Like it's putting the seed in the ground so that something can come out of it, because spiritual disciplines aren't for their own sake. They're meant to be for spiritual benefit, to draw you closer to God, to shape and change you, to grow you as a disciple. And another quote that I really loved is by M. Sean Copeland, who, so just pulling out all the books tonight, there's this book called Practicing Our Faith that has essays from a bunch of different authors, and this is one essay. And he talks about spiritual discipline in terms of saying yes and saying no. Would someone be willing to read this quote?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Struggle, growth, and transformation are our reality, and we become alert to our spirituality. And the practice of saying yes and saying no is part of its fabric, for without this practice, there can be no struggle, growth, and transformation. The practice challenges us to make ever more conscious our decisions about our worldviews, our lives, our very selves. Learning how and when to say yes and no is a practice that is crucial in our attempt to choose life. It is an essential part of our growth before, with, and toward the divine. We must learn the practice of saying no to that which crowds God out, and yes to a way of life that makes space for God.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
Yes.
Like, who struggles with saying no to things? Is that like a lonely struggle for me over here? Or
No,
is that-
Oh, no, it's not. Many times I catch myself. Oh, my.
That last part really got me. Saying no to that which crowds God out, and yes to a way of life that makes space for God.
Because that happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we do too much.
Yeah, what are some of those things that crowd God out? Just having a lot to do can be that.
Sometimes sometimes it's, yeah, I think having a lot to do or doing a lot, sort of, even if they're very good things, even if they're acts and actions that benefit the church or benefit the community, or are on their surface good things, but if it's getting in the way of your, if it's what's taking the place of your spiritual discipline, then that maybe needs to be reevaluated a little bit. Because we can do good things, but if we aren't careful and start doing them for the wrong motives and start doing it because we think it's gonna, lead to good things for us, or sort of do it as a way, for our community to praise us, and it becomes self-focused rather than others focused can, and it's not bad to feel good after helping someone, but if that becomes a reason for doing it, then that starts to kind of become a difficult thing to kind of recenter yourself from. So yeah, we can definitely, you know, doing a lot, even good things can sometimes get in the way too. But I think a lot of times it is just distraction. It's a lot of our news and our world and maybe our jobs sort of pulling us in ways that don't allow ourselves to give ourselves space for this. Yeah.
Well, I would much rather just do something,
Yeah.
even if it's laundry, or I like to do tangible things. I love to go to St. Andrew and just,
Mhm.
like, I'd rather do something. It feels good. It feels better. This is harder work for me.
Sure. Yeah.
And so often the choices are between good and good of the many things pre-COVID anyway, I had choices between good and so then it makes it really challenging to say no
Yeah.
and allow God in.
And
But
to
then I
remember
think-
that you have to remember to feed yourself as well. And that's where I think when we talk about being so busy, we forget that there's a part of us here who isn't alone. I'm not alone. I want to be doing God's work. If I shut him out, how much am I going to understand about what he really is calling me to do? So,
Well, and for me, there's a little fear about what he might actually be calling me to do,
oh, amen.
right? So it's like,
Oh,
if I
amen.
just stay busy with these things, then I don't
Oh,
have to pay
yes.
attention to that. Yeah.
But I think too, sometimes there's like the risk of the badge of busyness. You know, it's the comparative. Oh, I'm so busy. I have, you know, yada, yada, yada. And like you said, or several have said, it could be all good things, but then where is the space for God?
Yeah.
Where is the Sabbath?
Mhm.
Good connection.
Yeah.
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 And is it also because God's continually calling us out of our routines and out of our norms, right? So if it becomes just, hey, I do these things because that's what I'm comfortable with, then we're also like shutting out, as Pastor Tree said, other things that God might be calling us to, that might be calling us outside of our comfort zone and are difficult, but they're also calling us to a new way of thinking or a new way of being, that sort of expands our view of who God is and what God can do in the world and what the church is. And it sort of can be a way to stifle our growth sometimes as Christians. You know, and obviously that's a delicate balance because there are really good things that do require sort of, you know, the same thing in the grind. Then if that becomes so overwhelming that we don't have room for what else God might be calling us to, then we're shutting ourselves off from the growth that God might have for us.
If we don't set limits, we limit our transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, say that again.
That's a good one.
If I don't set limits, I may probably be limiting.
So I really appreciate in these, like the reframing of spiritual discipline, it's putting ourselves in that place to let God change us, or it's opening ourselves up for what God might have for us. So that's how fasting fits in. Fasting is one of those ways that is seeking to open us up, put us in the place to be receptive to God. And I know just like spiritual discipline had some, you know, can have some negative connotations. Fasting sometimes has some negative connotations too.
Ooh.
Standings of fasting. They are like, it's a practice for monks. It involves mortification. It's ancient.
Mhm.
Is like, yeah, it's a skinny Buddha. But that's sort of the mind, right? And who is who was a Trappist Catholic. He wrote a memoir, and he was sort of discerning the vocational life of being in a monastery, being a priest, and he was being asked about the Trappist monks, and he was told that they fast half of the year, like they spend half of the year fasting. And so he said in his autobiography, I was thinking about all that fasting and about the monastery. He said, it sounded cold and terrible. The monastery now existed in my mind as a big gray prison with barred windows, filled with dour and emaciated characters with their hoods pulled down over their faces. So kind of what can come to mind with fasting, but all stereotypes of it, and not really what it's meant to get at. So we're going to start off our talk of fasting by defining what fasting is not. So fasting, as we're talking about it tonight, isn't a diet plan. I know that there's like intermittent fasting, things that are introduced as like for your health, for the purpose of health, but fasting for a spiritual purpose is not a diet plan. Or is fasting always tied to food? There are many different things that can be abstained from in fasting. Fasting is not an opportunity to get social media likes or praise. You know, some people like to say when they're fasting, like, yeah, it's not something that makes you more holy than others. And fasting is not a requirement, asterisk. And there's an asterisk because Pastor Trudy had something to say about it, and she's going to argue with me that it is possibly a requirement. I'm ready to pull in Luther if I have to win. But you start, Pastor Trudy.
I mean, I think that's the Luther thing, though, right? Is that no, good works are not required, and fasting is not required.
Yeah.
But he'll also say, but it's a really darn good idea, you know? And so that's where my hesitation comes in, is that we're really quick to dismiss it. I think especially fasting, I think is one that it's kind of like foot washing. It's like pretty clear that it's a command in scripture, like wash each other's feet. And we're like, yeah, you know what? We'll drink wine and eat bread, but the foot washing we're not interested in. And I feel like fasting is we're really quick to dismiss it as not being. So that's why when we say it's not a requirement, it doesn't mean that it's not valuable or important. So bring it, Vix.
Well, I mean, yes, you are agreeing that it's not a requirement, but you are saying that it is beneficial.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean,
Luther would say.
Yeah. He does say that. I have a big anthology book of a lot of his different things. And in The Freedom of a Christian, which I quoted in my last sermon, he says, every person will need to discern the manner and limits of bodily disciplines. One ought to fast, watch, and labor to the extent such activities are needed to harness the body's desires and longings. However, those who presume that they are justified by works pay no attention to the need for self-discipline, but see the works themselves as a way to righteousness. So that's kind of where he's like, yes, do these sort of self-disciplines, these spiritual disciplines, in order to get your body in line with your spirit and to not hinder the inner person, which lives by faith. But as soon as you trickle into these things make me more holy, these things will save me, do not do them, because that work is not required for your salvation.
Yeah.
if we look at scripture, Jesus gives us an idea of what fasting shouldn't be in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, and whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. So that's sort of the comment I made back here. It's not an opportunity to get social media likes or praise. And then in Isaiah, he talks about fasting and what it shouldn't be. He says, why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. So this sort of, I think a lot of the prophets talk about it, the willingness of people to go along with piety. So like doing the things that might make you right in the eyes of the church or, the synagogue, but not really doing good works for those who are around you. So when you're concerned about your own holiness or well-being to the detriment of other people is what he's talking about here and what other prophets talk about too. So fasting shouldn't be, an opportunity to oppress your workers or fight or anything like that.
Fasting does make you hangry.
It can make you angry. That's right. If you're food fasting. You got something, Pastor Trudy? Couldn't tell.
No, I was just thinking, but I don't think fasting does make you hangry. I think when we don't eat regularly, like fasting is a different kind of thing. I don't know.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the reasons we get hangry is because we're used to having food at a certain time and we have an expectation that we're going to have food at a certain time and then it doesn't happen. And then we're
Right.
like, now I'm hangry, or something else has disrupted us from eating. That's when I get hangry. I'm just reflecting on myself. You may have a different experience. But like I get hangry when my expectations are disrupted. Not just hunger.
Yeah, I've never thought of that, but I know what you're saying. Whereas if you go into fasting, you're doing it voluntarily and you're doing it with intention. And
Right.
so you may feel hungry, but it's a different sort of mindset. That tracks with me.
Sure.
To what fasting is. So maybe that this sort of talk will be able to be continued in this section, but what fasting is at the most kind of basic, general, like not specific to food or anything. Fasting is abstaining from something for a length of time for the sake of spiritual benefit or centering on God. So what are some things that you can think of that maybe that you've had experience fasting from, or maybe would enjoy the opportunity to fast from?
Would enjoy the opportunity to fast from?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the idea is that what you're fasting from, multiple authors talk about these attachments or these things that are actually trapping us, or kind of obsessing over us or burying us. So fasting is a time to kind of peel yourself out from underneath that and put yourself, to a place to receive from God, to notice new things. And I've noticed that with food fasting, like I never realized how much of my day is spent around things concerning food until fasting from food. It's like, oh, I think about what I'm going to eat and then I prepare what I'm going to eat and then I eat it. But then you take out all of that and you're like, oh, I'm not eating today. And then there's all this space all of a sudden. It's kind of crazy. So what sorts of things can you imagine have you buried that maybe would be good to get out from underneath of for a time?
I think unhealthy social media consumption can be a thing.
There you go.
But I mean, we hear that a lot, right? Like we talk about it a lot these days, but it's real. It's a real thing, and it's easy to get sucked in and, you know, spend all kinds of time going through things when really we just logged in to look at one thing. And that kind of ties into discipline and kind of self-control too.
Well, you know what? I just had an aha moment. You know, I talked about those truth or dare chocolates.
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
realize the dares were all about fasting from social media?
Oh, wow.
So my
Oh,
chocolate was my chocolate, well played chocolate. It's like, because most people think about fasting. And chocolate's like, you need to fast from social media.
My gosh. Oh, that's funny.
Don't need to
It's like
fast from eating chocolate, but
It's like the Chick-fil-A, you know, where the cows
Oh,
eat
yeah,
more
the
chicken.
cows
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, social media, but I also think of fasting from even certain kinds of things like chocolate or desserts or something like that. Fasting from sugar.
Well, some of it, I happen to be a borderline diabetic, so I can't let my sugar go down to the basement. So I have to space things through the day and eat carefully. So I don't usually focus on eliminating those periods when I must eat, but I will eliminate something I love, which is really silly, but I love graham crackers. And often in the evening, I have a little glass that has a wide mouth, and I will get 1 or 2 sheets of graham cracker, and that will be my snack in the evening. I give that up, and boy, I want to tell you, I miss that.
Oh,
But it's something that says, okay, in place of that, it's time to sit here and have a little chat with the Lord. So that evens out. So there's so many different ways, I think, to give something up or to make some change that puts you in a different frame of mind than you're used to having or doing at that time.
When I used to drive more, you know, like driving to work when I was teaching, I would fast from listening to the radio or anything on my way to work. And so it was like 20 minutes of silence. And, you know, the first couple days it's like, ooh, and then you kind of got used to that time. And then, you know, often it'd be like, I'll just keep not listening to anything,
Mhm.
just creating that space.
Mhm.
and that leads into the second point here, which fasting is always meant to be paired with prayer, worship, devotion. So you're abstaining from something that seems to control you or to have some possessiveness over you in order that you can shift your focus, open yourself up to God instead. Which is one of the things that makes food fasting, you know, like I said, when you stop with the eating, like you have time, like there's time to spend because you don't have to think about the XYZ, like what you're eating, how to making it. So that automatically frees up space. But even other things that are time consuming, you know, all of us know what it's like to scroll through social media and then you're like, oh no, I just spent like an hour on social media or on YouTube or yeah, so using your time differently is another purpose behind fasting.
Mhm.
Fasting is a revealing of excessive attachments and the assumptions that lie behind them. So not only are you separating yourself from that, but you have time to like look at it from the outside and recognize its hold on you. Like, I don't know, if you have a knee-jerk reaction to pick up your phone and you're fasting from your phone, you can be like, I wonder why it's so essential for me to
Yeah.
answer that phone call as soon as it comes, or to answer that ping, right?
And I think to remind ourselves that I feel like I need this thing, but no, actually I don't. Like, I'm okay. I have control over this, rather than letting that thing, like a phone or whatever, control us, whether it's an urge or an item. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like I find that valuable, of just like actually my phone is blowing up right now because my trivia team is, I don't know what they're talking about, but like it's just like, yeah, no, like that'll still be there in 45 minutes or whatever. And reminding yourself that like that pace isn't always good, and doesn't always need to be that way. Yeah, I found that to be helpful.
Then the last point here, fasting is a time to remember the poor and those deprived of resources. And that's something that we get at in another Isaiah quote, but first Matthew. So both Matthew and Isaiah, say what fasting isn't, and then they give a portrayal of what fasting is. So Jesus, after he said this quote, or one we read earlier about disfiguring your face and everything, he says, but when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees you in secret will reward you. So not making a big deal of it is Jesus' point. And then Isaiah's point is to say, is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Powerful, right?
Yes.
And again, he's speaking against the tendency to think that piety matters more than how you interact with other people. So if your fasting becomes an opportunity to hate on people, to speak unwell of them, or it just is building you up inside to be prideful, Isaiah counters that to be like, that's not a fast that is good. It's better for you to be doing these acts of justice and helping people than to do that. But we talked at the beginning that you can be trapped between doing good. So keeping yourself mindful, like, how am I opening myself to God in your work, in your rest, in all of it?
At last, the not hide yourself from your own kin is really interesting, and I've never really known what to make of it.
Yeah.
I wonder the context that was being spoken to. I guess the only way, and you kind of alluded to this, Vicar Amber, like hiding yourself from your own kin is like putting on a front and like pretending like things are okay when they aren't. So not even allowing your family members to see your true self is kind of the way I'm interpreting it, but I don't know. I've never really known what that specifically is addressing. I don't know.
I don't have
Does kin mean family, or does it just mean not to hide yourself from my fellow human beings?
Yeah. Oh, could be. I interpret kin usually to mean family, but you're right. I mean, in the context, they are talking about about serving the homeless into your house, and so it could have a broader meaning. Definitely.
I don't know, because to me, it's like I can put my head down and not see the hungry person, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can hide from, just staying in my house, not seeing, putting on blinders.
And not seeing the oppression and the stuff that's going on in the world, for sure. Yeah.
But Isaiah is also, at least this far, this lateness in Isaiah 58, it's writing post-exile or just at exile. So like in the people of Israel are in Babylon. So you wonder about the sorts of like the relationships that could be happening there. You know, you have people, the Babylonians, and you have your own people, Israel. And are you more than happy to aid the people of Babylon to the exclusion of the people of Israel? That could be an issue in their community. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think the point is like make yourself available to the needs of people, like hiding yourself from your kin, like I don't want to deal with you, like I don't care about your problems. I think is what he's trying to speak against, right? Because it's like opening yourself to the needs of others.
Yeah. I love, I mean, we kind of miss in the Matthew passage, he talks about put oil on your head and wash your face, in contrast to sort of walking around with a disfigured look on your face. And I mean, basically what he's saying is like, take a shower and go out in the world, like, like clean yourself, look presentable. You know, put oil on your head was the equivalent. They didn't have shampoo, so that was the equivalent of cleaning your hair, and then washing your face so that you are clean and you look presentable to your community. And so that's the point, is like, it's not for other people, it's for you. You know, not necessarily hiding your needs, but the point of fasting is not for self-gratification. It's between you and your Father, and you are called to go out and to demonstrate Christ to others in that context. And when I was younger, I didn't really understand that, but seeing that in context of like, no, you're doing it for you. It's sort of, it reminds me also of the passage where you know, go into your closet to pray. Don't pray as the hypocrites pray, where they're out on street corners sort of proclaiming.
That's earlier in the same chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew 6 is all about secret, like relationship piety kind of thing. It's like, yeah, you don't need to like make yourself into something, like you're fasting. Easy. It's okay.
Yeah.
Dial it back, yo.
You can sit in the waiting room in the doctor's office and nobody has to know you're praying. Simple to just sit quietly. Nobody knows you're praying.
Yep.
So when thinking about when to fast, I mean, the season of Lent, a holy day, is an obvious one, but other occasions for fasting that the Bible speaks of are repentance. If you've read the story of Jonah, you know that the people and the animals of Nineveh fasted when Jonah told them that God would destroy them. And that was their way to say, we're sorry. Don't do this to us. And then God doesn't. And there are other instances of all of these in scriptures besides the one I brought up, but these are, examples. So repentance, preparation. Esther and her maids and the Jews of Susa fasted for 3 days before she approached a King Ahasuerus, when the decree was put out that all the Jews in around Susa would be killed. So she prepared herself to make that, to approach the king by fasting. When there are occasions of intense mourning, people tend to fast, like the people of Israel fasted in sadness after they needed to go against the tribe of Benjamin. Like for days, they are going against their own kinsmen, right? The tribe of Benjamin is one of the 12. And God said, yep, you need to keep going. And so they spent those nights after battles in fasting. And then the final occasions for fasting in the Bible are holy days, which these are just a few of them offered in like across religions, and we'll move to Christianity in a second. But Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all have communal occasions for fasting. And it should make sense because, you know, we're the Abrahamic religions. We share a lot in common with each other. For Judaism, the main day of fasting is Yom Kippur, which is their Day of Atonement. So again, one of the reasons for fasting is repentance. And there are multiple fasts of mourning in the Jewish tradition, which I think is interesting because I don't think that Christianity has any official fasting day for communal mourning of past events. And for the Jews, they remember the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. They remember the destruction of Jerusalem. And the fast that takes place on Tisha B'Av also remembers the Spanish Inquisition and the deportation of Jews to concentration camps. So these big moments in the history of the Jewish people. So they live into these by having fasts and remembering that sorrow. And other fasts include just before Purim, which recalls the story of Esther, and then the fast of the firstborn, which I know exists, but I did not read much into it. So it's a special fast for firstborn male children, to recall that, firstborn males in Egypt were slain, whereas the firstborn and all in the people of Israel were spared during the Passover. In Islam, their main fast time, which I don't know if they have other smaller occasions for fasting, but their main one is Ramadan, which Ramadan is one of their months. It's 30 days long, and it involves abstaining from food and drink while the sun is up. So you can eat right before the sun rises and then right after it sets. So there's usually communal dinners and things like that provided. So that seems pretty intense, but I know that there's opportunities, like if you're pregnant or if you are elderly or sick, there's like exemptions.
Also, if you're very young. We have
Mm.
very good friends who are Muslim, and they absolutely did that for 30 days. Ramadan was really something. Is really something.
Well, and also if you have health, like if you're diabetic
issues,
or if
yeah.
health issues, there's exceptions.
But yeah, and as I say, elderly and young children can eat.
And I know, like, while the sun is up, not eating is like, I've heard of it being tough for athletes, student athletes, that you're playing football all day long and you're fasting. Or people that live in very sunny areas when this month happens to come around. Like, I think there was a newspaper article that was like, what do you do if you're in, like, there's a place where there's sunshine like 24 hours. Yeah, like, what do you do if Ramadan falls in that time period? Like, when do you eat? And I can't remember what the answer was, but they were pretty strict about it, as strict as they could be with the sun up observance.
Well, that's fascinating.
And that's something that, like, if you can do it, they do it. Which just seems interesting that, like, at least in the Protestant tradition, that, fasting is optional. We don't really.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, did she freeze?
Oh, it looks like Vicar Amber and Pastor Trudy both.
Oh, no. Shoot!